Welcome back to This Is Live, the Sunday talk show here on the RIS News channel. Still with me, I have Chinyere, legal practitioner and national development advocate, Okoyemi Adamolekun, executive director, Enough is Enough, and Professor David Aworawo, professor of international relations and strategic studies at the University of Lagos. The Central Bank of Nigeria this week resolved to leave the monetary policy parameters, including the monetary policy rate, the benchmark interest rate, unchanged at current levels. The Monetary Policy Committee of the Apex Bank unanimously voted to hold policy retaining the MPR 27.5%, which is the rate at which commercial banks borrow from the central bank. The committee also retained the asymmetric corridor around the MPR at +5 minus 100 basis points. Cash reserve ratio of deposit money banks at 50% and merchants banks at 16%, and left the liquidity ratio unchanged at 30%. Addressing journalists after the 300th meeting of the MPC in Abuja, CBN Governor Olayemi Cardoso acknowledged relative improvements in some key macroeconomic indicators, which were expected to support the overall moderation in prices in the near to medium term. In the meantime, the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and the Nigeria Employers Consultative Association on Saturday lamented the continued retention of the monetary policy rate at 27.5% since November 2024. According to the associations, this has been the case despite a global wave of interest rate reductions aimed at revitalizing economic productivity and combating stagflation. Dr. Chinyere Almona is Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. She joins me now on This Is Live, the Sunday talk show, to discuss the likely impact going forward of the retention of CBN's MPR at current levels. Good to see you, madam, and thank you for joining us on This Is Live.
Thanks, Dr. Bati, for having me.
Well, sometime during the week, there was this story all over the papers that the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which you lead, and also the Nigeria Employers Consultative Association, NECA, have all protested that the rates that the Monetary Policy Committee unanimously agreed upon, holding all the rates as they did in the previous meeting, that people in business, organized private sector, that you are complaining that this would stifle growth and high rates not good for business. And SCCI, in a statement, specifically is advocating for a shift in terms of policy measures. In fact, asking that these interest rates should be brought down. Why?
Thank you, Dr. Bati. The reality is that with the holding of these rates at 27.50 is still very high for businesses. Today, a lot of businesses are struggling because of lack of access to finance, or rather lack of access to affordable finance. Therefore, as interest rates move up, companies are then limited by what they can do. They're limited by how much funds they can get and what they can deploy that funds to do. And that then affects everything, because that increases cost of doing business, products and services are no longer competitive, and that leaves the common man, Nigerians, having to suffer with the high price of goods and commodities. But also, with businesses struggling to maintain or to keep their costs measured, you have job losses now, because people are trying to constrain their ability to deliver on a certain objective. So we are complaining because the private sector is negatively impacted. We want to do business, we want to grow the economy, but we can't do that if we don't have access to finance. So we're saying to the CBN, while we understand, so the CBN governor explained the basis of this decision, and it's logical. However, there needs to be some concession for particularly the small businesses for them to be able to do business. We need to think of how do we either provide concessionary loans for this small business, how do we encourage them so that they can grow the economy. We can't say on one hand we want an economy that is blooming, we want to grow our economy, and on the other hand we are shortchanging ourselves. You know, it's like running a race with your hands tied behind you. You can't move forward very quickly. And that's why the OPS is agitating that, you know, something that needs to be a review. Or hopefully at the next MPC meeting, we should consider a reduction.
Okay, but Madam, the CBN governor said they took a cautious approach, a conservative approach, in order to further measure the impact of, you know, the benchmark rates that they have decided upon. For what reason? They said that, look, the decision taken at the last meeting has helped to stabilize the Naira. The Naira has been between 1,500 and 1,600. It has attracted, you know, the policies have attracted foreign direct investment to a very high degree, you know, and also that, you know, there's some growth within the economy, and that, look, they have to further measure what is going on before they can take any decision. Is it that the organized private sector has not benefited in any way from this, you know, current regime with the CBN saying we are holding the rates to further see what will happen?
So if you compare increasing rate and holding rates, we're happy the rate hasn't gone up, right? Because if it's gone up, it will be more difficult for us to do business. However, we still maintain that 27.50 is high. So you can say you are attracting foreign direct investment, but if you can't develop your local community, your local business ecosystem, if you can't provide finance to help them thrive, then it's really not very effective. It's not an effective way to grow an economy if you're inviting foreigners to invest in Nigeria, but you're not supporting those who want to invest. Small businesses are looking to invest. Even medium-sized businesses, Nigerians are tenacious. They want to do business. They want to support. They want to employ their neighbors. They want to grow the economy. However, we can't do that if we can't get access to finance. Now, if you take a typical business who wants to borrow money from a bank, you go to the bank, the process alone is intimidating. Now, by the time you go through all that process to even get the loan, which is at very high rates, and then by the time you start to deploy that into productive facilities, it's time to repay the loan. So the terms of the loan isn't helpful. So CBN needs to bear in mind that, I mean, over the months, we've talked about having a balance between monetary and fiscal. So the monetary policies will help stabilize the rate, yes, but we have an economy that is already bleeding. We have an economy that is struggling. So we want rates that will support us to get out of the, you know, the difficulties that we are in, and that's what the private sector is calling for. And I did say at the beginning, and if you look at the statement that the Lagos Chamber of Commerce issued, we did say that there should be like cautious optimism, right? Because we know that if the rate drops too quickly, it will put the credibility of the system will be in doubt, because all the macroeconomic factors are still very harsh for businesses. Power cost is very high, logistics cost is very high. So with all of these structural impediments, a sharp drop in the rate may be a challenge. But we're saying that central bank needs to pay attention to the fiscal side of things, to say, how do we even grow this economy? How do we encourage the banks to lend to the real sector? Today, banks are making profits from all the charges and everything, but the real sector is struggling. That's not an effective way to grow an economy.
Okay, in fairness to the CBN governor, Olayemi Cardoso, in his press conference, he talked about, you know, better correspondence between monetary and fiscal authorities. He made that clear, that going forward, that's one of the things they will focus upon. But in the statement by SCCI, you had 4 specific recommendations about investor confidence, about price stability, about arbitrage, about transparency. If you could just take us through those
Okay, so one of the key things we said we need to do, that CBN should actually continue on its trajectory with the reforms. So continue with the reforms that you're doing. Make sure it's concluded properly, okay? Because sometimes we have good policies, but implementation and execution is a problem. So we're saying continue with that. But we're also saying that there has to be transparency in our lending processes with the bank. So CBN needs to ensure that there's proper transparency so that we're not having we have the interest rate, and then we have layered charges upon charges on everything for businesses. If you need an item, they charge you for this, they charge you for that. So if there are so many charges, then we're seeing a rate that's moving from the 27.50 that it is to something close to 40 because of charges. So we're saying there should be transparency in the process so that we can trust, we can see what are we being charged for, and we can see where it's going to. Also, we said, look, if you need to pay attention to the forex, the exchange rate, because you must reduce the cost or the avenue for arbitrage. Yeah, if there's a wide gap between the official rate and the MPR rate, then people take advantage of it.
I thought that the exchange rate
is coming together, so we're saying
unified.
It's not the same. There's still a gap. The gap is, we're hoping that the gap is narrower than it was before, but we're hoping that it continues to narrow until it's unified, so that there's no reason for arbitrage. But we also did say that we need to perhaps take a hint from the development institutions. They are all focused on what are the priority sectors and how can we help the priority sectors to thrive. So for those priority strategic sectors, government needs to think, how do we perhaps provide concessionary rates? We're still waiting for the, in the stabilization bill, there was a talk about 1 trillion loan to the private sector. We still haven't seen that. So there are things that government needs to do and do very quickly so that we can begin to take advantage or begin to enjoy the benefit of the reforms that we see. So today it's being protracted because the situation on the ground is still very harsh.
Okay. Earlier on, you mentioned the next MPC meeting. That will be 21 to 22nd July. And you were saying that you hope that at that July meeting that the Monetary Policy Committee will reduce rates. But this is my question. The dates for MPC meetings are always advertised about a month ahead. It's well known. Now, why is it that the organized private sector is always reacting after the fact? Before this last MPC meeting held, April 19 to 20, organized private sector could have made recommendations. Is it not possible for organized private sector to be more proactive instead of waiting for MPC to meet? MPC now says we are holding or we are changing direction, and then you start issuing statements, complaining, whereas you could have made inputs into the meeting. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Abati. That's such an important, it's a very great question, because it points to the gap between economic governance and private sector advocacy. The reality is that today, the MPR conversations are very isolated from the real sector. And the CBN operates independently. Unlike in the fiscal policy side, where the organized private sector will, freely engage with governments, the ministries, the agencies, and departments of government, and even the legislative arm, it's not exactly the same with the monetary policy regime. And there isn't, I think, in Nigeria, for instance, there isn't any formal way to engage. In some countries, you have a formal way for the monetary and the fiscal to engage. You have a formal way for the business sector and the central bank to engage on policies, but there's no formal way in Nigeria. However, having said that, the reality is that for most of the organized private sector agencies, they find ways to have this recommendation you talk about and share with government. For instance, at Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, we have quarterly press conferences, right, where we talk about the state of the economy. At the end of that discussion, we send a report to the central bank and to the legislative arm. But we haven't seen adequate uptake from what we present. So that tells us that even within the central bank and with the conversation at MPC, there isn't a structured way to pick up feedback from the organized private sector. And I'm hoping that we'll get to that point where we institutionalize something. We can have a MPR, MPC, private sector conversation or dialogue. It should be something that is regular. In some climes, they have a regular way to meet, which we don't have. So there's a structural defect. But we, at the organized private sector, we have tried to bridge that defect by showcasing. When we have, we make very important press statements we send to the central bank. Like I talked about the state of the economy, we send to the central bank. That should give the central bank indication of how the real sector is feeling, how the private sector is faring, for them to be able to make decisions. So we hope to see that central bank can take information from there. And other bodies, NACIMA does, I think MAN will do so, NECA, we all provide information at some point. It's not formalized, but we all provide information at some point to the central bank. But having said that, I will also say that being reactive today means that we're actually proactive the following day, right? Because at the end of the last time they held the rate, we made statements. We said this is how it's affecting us. And that should feed into the next conversation. But we don't see that uptake. So that's where there's a challenge. And we hope that that can be ameliorated in the near future.
Okay, madam. One of the things that the Tinubu administration has done is to sign an executive order on what it calls Nigeria First policy. Now, this Nigeria First policy is supposed to benefit, to be of advantage to the organized private sector. And yet, in one of the statements issued, I think by Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, there was a complaint about Nigeria First policy not likely to work with this MPR of 27.5%. What is the attitude of the organized private sector towards this Nigeria First policy? Because it's basically buy Nigeria goods. When your members provide goods and services, the government is saying they should be prioritized.
So we're happy we celebrated the Nigeria First policy because it's encouraging local production. And when Nigerian companies are more productive, when they have business or contract and they are more productive, then they can employ more people. So we're happy with the Nigeria First. But I believe that what the statement was actually alluding to was the fact that if the interest rate is so high and businesses are not able to get the right level of funding for their business, and then the macroeconomic indicators, so rising power costs, logistic costs, all these other costs that are so high, that the Nigerian business person who is producing is not competitive. So your cost of production is still very high. So the item you produce, so let's say we say, oh, buy Nigeria first, buy Nigeria goods, and we see an item by a Nigerian and it's costing 50,000, for instance, and an imported equivalent will cost 20,000, right? Everybody will say, which one should we go to? But the fact is, the Nigeria product being 50,000 is due to the cost of doing business, the regulatory challenges that we face in this climate, the interest rate which is so high, the fuel cost, the power challenges. There's just so many challenges bedeviling the Nigerian businesses. So we're saying, government, yes, Nigeria First, we applaud that. But remember, Nigeria First, we are encouraging businesses to produce, right? If we don't produce enough for the demand, what happens? Everybody will still import. So we're saying we need to produce enough for the demand that we are going to see as we implement the Nigeria First policy. And so that's what the thing was saying, that if the rates continue to be high, then businesses are not able to produce as much as they can produce because the demand should actually rise.
Well, I agree with you. Straightforward economics. And thank you very much, Dr. Chinyere Almona, for joining us on This Day Live, this Sunday Talk Show. We take another break now here on This Day Live, this Sunday Talk Show.